I've got 9 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. By the way, I want to say thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. I greatly appreciate it. We get a round of applause for Velda and Marita and Jason for making this happen. I also, at the onset, I want to take a moment of silence. Chief Justice Katie passed away last Friday, and I believe that they have services today. So he was involved in all of this. He seemed like he was a good advocate and supporter of the community and what we do. So let's just take a few moments of silence for him and his family. All right, so another level set. This is not a protest. I need to make that very clear. I've talked to a number of you as you are rolling in, and it seems like the community is really on board with everything that we're doing here. This is meant to be a positive event. I know that I see the black shirts, and if you're on, you're all on webcam over there, so the attendees can actually see you. But if you look around the room, we have lots and lots of black SEC DSM shirts. Big thanks to SEC DSM for coming out and supporting us. We got EFF shirts. We have an amazing support from the community. We have a number of pen testing firms that are represented here. Very happy to see Dell SecureWorks is here representing a very strong contingent of people with Dell SecureWorks, and I'm sure that there's other firms that are in the audience. And the goal of this is not to basically explain and try to get people to agree with us. We need to understand that by and large, the people that are in the security community can be a very intimidating group of people. We're very cliquey. We tend to be very insular to the rest of the community, and we assume that people understand what we do for a living whenever it comes to penetration testing and security attacks to evaluate organizations from a cyber perspective and also from a physical perspective. So this is really designed for us to get out into the community and get the community to see who we are. And it's also kind of a conversation. Because let's be honest, if we look at what has happened, right, with the Coalfire situation, and by the way, if anybody mentions that Coalfire is not present, I want to make it very clear that I do not blame them for not being present at all. If I was the owner of Coalfire, I'd be like, stay away from Adel, do not go there. That's absolutely the right call on their place. But if we look at this entire situation, we have had a number of security firms, we have had a number of experts, and God help me, thought leaders, stand up and say, well, this was done wrong, or the sheriff was wrong, the deputies were wrong, the pen testers were wrong, the company's contract, their legal department was wrong. And the only thing that I take from that is that there still needs to be a clearer conversation for us to get some level of consensus on how to do these things moving forward and to do it safely and effectively, okay? So I believe that this is a conversation. So if you're coming here trying to tell the world how things should be done, time to take a step back, and we need to step back and say, how can we learn, work with each other to come up with something better? Because honestly, let's be completely clear, this entire industry, we haven't come up with clear definitions of what a pen test is, let alone talking about what a contract should entail for physical security. As I said, if anybody starts getting disruptive, if you start being rude, if you start calling out the pen testing firm Coalfire, calling them names, ad hominem attacks against anybody in the community, against any judges, against the sheriff, I will ask you to leave. If you're here with an agenda and you're here to make a scene, there's the door. By the way, if anybody else comes in, if you could kind of share that with them, if they come in later, I would greatly appreciate it. So our first presenter today is someone I have known 17 years? Something like that. 17 years. He was literally the first person that we called. Velda picked up the phone immediately and called Ben to come and present. The reason why is there are very, very, very few lawyers in the world that understand computer security, and there are even fewer still that actually have the guts to get up and teach it once a month or once every other month with the SANS Institute. So the idea that we could get a legal expert that is a SANS instructor, fly him out here, is a tremendous benefit to this particular con. If I could get a round of applause welcoming Ben Wright to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hold on.
Go ahead. Make it easy for me. I just want to push the down button.
There we go. Just dead simple. Dead simple.
The down button.
Yeah, there we go.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and to be broadcast on this topic. I am a lawyer from Texas and have quite a bit of experience thinking about working with all kinds of organizations related to technology and cybersecurity. And my biggest education in this field is teaching the SANS Institute course on the law of data security and investigation. So I get to meet a lot of people from around the world who teach me things and disagree with me and advance my knowledge. I'm not here today to take a position on any particular party's correct actions or wrong actions. I'm not here to advocate for any particular party. I am here to try to help us as a community better understand what has happened and what we can learn from it. And I am going to be saying there's more to be learned from this incident. It's not all over. The facts have not all come out. And I don't know all the facts, and I don't necessarily know all the publicly known facts. I've spent quite a bit of time in the last 10 days or so reading documents and media reports and watching a hearing in front of a committee of the Senate of the state legislature here in Iowa. So I come to this topic very humbly, hoping that I can offer some ideas, but also very open to the idea that I can learn things as well. And so I'm very open to question and answer, and it's more fun for me to go through more of a question and answer type of process, though I've got some slides, and we'll probably have time to go through the slides. So I'm sure we will manage the questions and answers in an efficient way so that people online can follow what's going on. An extremely helpful document in terms of trying to really understand what happened is this investigative report that was put together by this law firm, and I'm not sure how to pronounce the first name, for Gray Baker Daniels. So I'll briefly talk about what has happened here, because not everybody participating here, not everyone watching knows the basic fundamental facts, although they're probably pretty well known among a lot of us. The state court administration of the state of Iowa had a contract with a relatively large cybersecurity firm named Coalfire. They originally had a contract from 2015, and then this year they talked to 3 different firms about having a contract this year, and they decided to go with Coalfire in part because they had experience with Coalfire. So they signed a contract to have Coalfire perform a number of tests broadly understood as penetration tests. And there were 3 physical locations that were identified in the documents as being within the scope of these tests. And they were the state court building in Des Moines. So this belonged to the state government. The second building was the Polk County Courthouse in Des Moines. And the third building was the Dallas County Courthouse here in Dallas County, Iowa. And the documents provided for a number of different steps that Coalfire was supposed to engage in. And some of this included physical attempts to get into these buildings. And on September 10, apparently after hours, a couple of Coalfire employees apparently were able to get into the state court building. I think it's called State Branch Building, State Judicial Branch Building in Des Moines. and apparently they were able to get into the Polk County Courthouse September 10. Around midnight, moving into the day of September 11, they got into the Dallas County Courthouse here in Dallas County. Apparently alarms go off and a dispatcher sends deputy sheriffs to the courthouse. And these guys are there, they appear, they present themselves to the deputy sheriffs. The sheriff himself shows up after a little while, and they produce a document that I've printed out a copy of it here. It's titled a social engineering authorization. It's got Coal Fire's logo at the top of it. We'll talk more about the content of this document. The sheriff and his deputies reviewed the document. They called a couple of people who were identified on the document. They called cell phones of people. So you're, contacting people now late at night. We're now around 1 o'clock in the morning or so. And a couple of state court administrators answered their cell phones and made some statements. And the sheriff was not satisfied that these two coal fire employees were supposed to be doing the things that they had done. So he arrested them, and they were charged with relatively high crime of burglary. That kicked off then an investigation by the Supreme Court of Iowa. In effect, the Supreme Court oversees the administration of the state courts. And the Supreme Court wanted to know what happened and why did this happen and where are we on this and what lessons can be learned from it. So they hired this law firm to very quickly put together a 30-page report. And I'm pretty impressed with the quality of the report that was put together within just 2 weeks. People obviously stayed up overnight working on this document, compiling all the evidence and analyzing the evidence. There was a lot of documentation that they were able to pull together, and they spoke to a number of people with information, including the state court administrators who were involved, various staff of the state court administration, including people from coal fire. Importantly, Dallas County did not directly county attorney who eventually brought the criminal charges did not participate in that document. So it's a very useful document, but it doesn't answer everything. I see a gentleman got a hand.
Do you know why they didn't participate? Were they not invited, or they choose not to participate?
Well, I don't know for sure. I have someone in the back who knows something. Okay, I need to repeat the question. So yes, the question is, do I know why the county did not participate in that particular investigative document? No, I don't, although I'll be saying in a few minutes that the county attorney, who is the prosecutor, needs to be very careful what he says and when he says it. And as I'm going to be saying, his job is to ensure that there is a fair judicial process. So criminal charges have been filed, and he needs to ensure that he respects that process. And therefore, he needs to be very careful about making public statements to other people, including these investigators, that are not within the judicial process. So this investigation was not within this criminal process that relates to those two particular employees. So I'm not sure that the district, the county attorney would have much to say about this. And I think my guess is, from the sheriff's point of view is, I've already made some public statements about this, and he actually, the sheriff gave testimony to a oversight committee at the Senate of the Illinois legislature. So maybe the sheriff felt like, I've already said enough, I don't need to be participating in this. There was another hand, the same kind of question. All right, so If you read that 30-page document, you'll find this is a complex situation. There were a lot of documents, contracts, terms of engagement, and so on. And they were complex documents. They're not just a short little stack of documents. It takes time for anyone to read it and start analyzing it to understand what it said. One of the important things that happened at the night in question is that 2 state court administrators were contacted by telephone, and they gave conflicting information to the sheriff. So in effect, as the sheriff calls in the middle of the night, looking at this, what is called the get out of jail free card, the social engineering authorization card, the sheriff calls and he gets conflicting information out of these people who are listed here on the document. In addition, there was a third person listed on the document, but his cell phone number was inaccurate. It wasn't correct, so they couldn't reach this third person. So as the sheriff is trying to evaluate this situation, he's evaluating what the document says, he's evaluating what these guys are doing, and the things that they have done to get into the courthouse and their behavior once they were in the courthouse. Now he's getting, in the middle of the night, 2 different messages. One, a state administrator says, yes, they're authorized to do this, and another one said, I'm not so sure they're supposed to be in the courthouse at night. Yes, we have a contract with them, but I'm not sure about this particular situation. Okay, so the sheriff makes his decision at that time. It's a snap kind of decision that he makes at that time. Does all of this mean that coal fire employees have committed a crime? I don't know, and I'm not going to take a position on that. Now, the county attorney has taken that position in a very formal way. The county attorney first filed felony burglary charges against these guys, but as more information came out, probably, I'm guessing, as this investigative document was being put together and was being circulated, my guess is that the county attorney was aware of this information, was aware of this report, and therefore he decided that this was not a burglary, that it was criminal trespass, which is a much less serious crime, but it's still a crime nonetheless. And as a lawyer, started thinking about this, trying to really drill in to what had happened and how the county was responding to it, I was asking, let's see, did the employees commit a crime? Or wait a minute, they were working as agents of the company Coal Fire. Maybe Coal Fire is the one who made the mistake, and they were just acting as agents, and maybe they were acting, I don't know, to what degree they were acting under orders from management. And that's a question I'm going to be raising a little later here in the slides. I don't know precisely what they were told by management, and I don't know precisely what management was aware of at the time that they were doing these things. So I started wondering, gosh, is the county's complaint really against these employees? Why these employees, rather than complaining against Coal Fire and saying Coal Fire either committed a crime or was engaged in civil trespass? Further, I asked, really, is the county's dispute with the state court administrators? They are the ones who kicked this thing off, and they were the ones who were paying these people to do this, and they're the ones who enabled this situation to get set up. Maybe that's the problem. I don't know, and it leaves some mystery around this whole situation, because in effect, it's not that, to me, it's not this clear-cut example that clearly a couple of people made a mistake and therefore they're the bad guys, or they're the ones who need to be held accountable. There's a number of people, to one degree or another, arguably have made some mistakes. And I'll say here in a few minutes, the state Supreme Court Justice, who just passed away, admitted that his organization made a mistake and apologized apologized for it very publicly. And I'm going to drill for a moment onto this question of actually trying to convict these two coal fire employees of criminal trespass. I have not, in the past 10 days, become an expert on Iowa law related to criminal trespass. And so I've not gone out and read all the cases, and they're probably in Iowa. There are cases dating back 150 years of the courts evaluating these kinds of things and setting really specific kinds of standards on what kind of evidence needs to be produced and to prove that someone has criminally trespassed upon land. I see Iowa Code section 716.7, and broadly speaking, it speaks in terms of entering property without permission with some kind of bad intent. And whether precisely that little paraphrase that I put up there is the best articulation of the law that's being cited by the county attorney, I don't know. But this Iowa Code section 716 has a number of subsections that relate to criminal trespass, and it's beyond the scope of what I'm capable to do here to pull up these laws and read through them and parse through them and say precisely how Iowa courts would interpret these laws under the particular facts that we see here. Now, this being a criminal prosecution, the prosecutor will be required, if this case goes all the way to court and goes to a jury, he'll be required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these people had in fact committed a crime. And so I understand the defendants have asked for a jury trial, and so a jury trial could be quite a challenge for the prosecutor, depending upon what all the evidence is. Pull together the evidence and explain it to a jury, given that there were some factors that seemed to suggest the employees thought that they were doing what they were supposed to do. For example, there were general discussions of after-hours entry into these three facilities, the two county courthouses and the state judicial branch building in Des Moines. So there had been discussions of these things, and there are documents that make certain kinds of statements, although there's a lot of ambiguity in the documents about entering buildings after hours. Furthermore, on September 10, apparently these two Pentesters got into the state judicial branch building, and they got all the way to the desk of one of these IT administrators who is overseeing the contract and who's named here on the get out of jail free card. They got up to his desk and they left one of their business cards on his desk. So next day he comes in and he sees, oh, these coal fire guys are out there, and they got to my desk, and he sends them an email congratulating them for finding their way in. And he says, I'm interested to know how easy it was for you to get into our building. So there already was evidence that these coal fire employees believed that there was approval for them to be doing things that could physically get them into a judicial building after hours, and they were getting some approval for that. One of the things that is very sensitive to me is that for these employees, even if they are found innocent by whatever means, or the charges are dropped, they still suffer an awful lot personally from this experience. I've seen their mugshots numerous times, and their mugshots end up getting spread all over the place. And my experience is once your mugshot gets out there, it never goes away. And so even if they are found not guilty or the charges are dropped, they still have this negative piece of information out there floating around about them that can always be pulled up by anybody, such as a future employer who's trying to look into them, or future friend or whatever, someone trying to get to know who are these people, and there's a mugshot showing that they were arrested. The prosecutor needs to take all these considerations into mind as he advances the case. He's got to be careful. He has an obligation to only be advancing a case if he believes that he can win it and believes that he can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these people have in fact committed a crime. It's a very serious step on the part of the prosecutor to be advancing this criminal prosecution. A very interesting development from my perspective was November 13, last week, ARS Technica published a document, article that included interviews of the sheriff, statement from the county attorney, interviews with the lawyer who is representing the coal fire employees. And it started shedding some more light for me on what people think and what happened here. So at first I thought, wow, this document from the lawyers with the 30-page report, I thought that was the Rosetta Stone. It told me everything I needed to know. But then I saw this ARS Technica article and I realized, oh, there's still a lot more I don't know. There's still some important pieces of evidence that the law firm didn't have access to, and it told me, in effect, there's still more to come out in this this whole situation. So the sheriff appeared to be pretty open to public interview. I think he'd been open to other public interviews, but he was pretty open to a public interview with the ARS Technica writer. And the ARS Technica writer said, have you read that 30-page report from the law firm that the state court has hired the law firm to create? He said, no, I've not read that report. And so the reporter said, well, there's some information in that document suggesting that these employees had authority to do what they were doing. And the sheriff didn't get into a real nitpicky legal discussion about what's authorized, what's not authorized. He said, you know, those guys were nice guys that night. And he said, if they were supposed to be here, I don't want a mark on their record. And then he started making some other statements that were interesting. He sounded a little more political, and politics is part of what's going on here. And we got to understand the political situation, and ultimately for educational purposes as cybersecurity professionals, we've got to understand the political situation. The political situation can be just as important as the legal situation as we engage in any kind of work. And politically, then he starts saying, well, you know what? If they actually had permission to do this, their CEO should have called me and started explaining all this to me, because apparently there's all these documents that the sheriff hasn't seen. He did not see the contract with Coal Fire and the state courts. He didn't see the terms of engagement. All he saw was this get out of jail free card. Okay, that's an interesting point. He says the CEO should have called him, and that raises an interesting question. Why didn't Coal Fire quickly call, maybe through their lawyer, maybe through the CEO, maybe somehow, and start presenting all this evidence to the sheriff and helping him to better understand what was going on? I can speculate. I could imagine where I Coal Fire and I find that a couple of my employees have been arrested. I go, wow, what's going on here? I don't know. I've got to do some research. You know, just reading these documents, I got to go back and read these documents, see what the documents say. I've got to somehow hear what the employees have to say, and who knows what the employees are saying at this particular time. Employees may have been informed, you know, you need to shut up, stop talking about this, even to your management. I don't know about that. One of the things the company quickly does is it thinks, we got to hire a lawyer. We got to hire a lawyer here in Iowa. We got to get that person up to speed. And so it takes time for a company at an executive level to react to this thing and understand what's going on. And so it takes time just to be in a position to call the sheriff and start talking to him and start explaining your side of the story. And were I management, I would be reluctant very quickly to start calling the sheriff, because if I don't really understand the situation, then I may be just digging our hole deeper. Yes.
But, I mean, isn't that part of the sheriff's job to investigate this? And it sounds like he's kind of largely shirking his responsibilities and just kind of sticking his head in the sand saying, I don't want to know this. I don't want to know this, you know. And that's what it seems like to me. It's, you know, this information is available and you choose not to let it in. You're negligent, I think.
Okay, so the point the gentleman is asking is whether it's the sheriff's responsibility to engage in a deep investigation of this situation and read all the documents. I've been spending 10 days reading all these documents and trying to understand all of this. And of course, I'm a lawyer. The sheriff's not a lawyer. The sheriff is just a sheriff. And the sheriff's got a whole bunch of other things to do rather than just working on this one particular case. So the sheriff, as I understand it, the sheriff did his work. The sheriff gathers the evidence at that particular situation. He arrests the guys. He talks to the county attorney. Now the county attorney takes it over. Now the county attorney decides, based on the evidence that I have available here, does it look like there's a crime? Should I file charges? And it appears to me that the county attorney is the one who has taken it upon himself to run a deeper investigation and read these documents and so on. So it really gets outside of the hands of the sheriff, is my guess. Now, I don't know exactly what the rules are here in a county in Iowa, but my guess is there comes a point where law enforcement says, we've done what we're supposed to do. If the county attorney wants me to go investigate something else, they want to go get more information or something, okay, we'll go do those kinds of things. But like reading all these documents that the law firm read, that doesn't sound too much like what a county sheriff is supposed to be doing after he's arrested the people and gotten the basic evidence on site. So he's really, my guess is he's really out of the loop here. Now he can have an influence, and he even said that if the CEO of Coal Fire had called him quickly, first 2 or 3 days, and presented the evidence to him and was persuasive, he would say, you know, I turned to the county attorney, Chuck, and I'd say, you know, I think you ought to be lenient on these guys. And I might have some influence on him, but I'm just the sheriff. And therefore, I can't tell the county attorney what to do. The county attorney is a prosecutor who makes the decisions. And once things get rolling with a formal charges filed, it's in the hands of the county attorney. So another thing that the sheriff said that was more of a political kind of statement, and it's an important statement, is he restated something that he had said earlier. He says that courthouse belongs to the county. It doesn't belong to the state administrators. And therefore, the state administrators don't have authority to authorize people to try to break into that courthouse. Now, this is an important legal question that hangs over this whole case. Did the state court administration have legal authority to hire Coal Fire to try to break into the buildings and otherwise engage in pen tests within the buildings? And the law firm that wrote the 30-page report wrote a pretty esoteric legal analysis of this question as to whether the state courts have the authority to take aggressive steps to ensure the security of the local courthouse. Now, part of the argument on why the state's administrators have authority to do something about the county courthouse is that the courthouse has a state court in it. So that you have both county offices and a county court in there, but you also have a state district court in there. And the legal analysis from the law firm said, well, it's not entirely clear what scope the state court administrators have for trying to secure the building or test the security of the building, but there is what we lawyers call kind of a colorable argument that the state did have the authority to secure the building, test the security of the building, take appropriate steps to secure the building. Nevertheless, the sheriff says, look, that building belongs to the county, and it's our responsibility to secure that building. And the state did not have the authority to give these guys permission to come in. Okay, so this starts coming up higher into more of a political type of argument. Yes, it's a legal argument, but it's also a political argument. And this kind of argument came up in the Senate Oversight Committee hearing in the state legislature. So you get state legislatures hearing this, and they've got their opinions on these types of things. I see a question.
Was there anything in your review that came up indicating the state had socialized this? It seems strange that it wouldn't have been something that was part of a security plan by the state to go out and check some of these things. Is it reasonable that the counties had no knowledge that this was even something being discussed?
Okay, so the gentleman.
And Polk County didn't seem to have a problem with it, is that correct?
Okay, there's two questions. Let's take one at a time. So the first question is, did the state court administrators, as they are putting together this pen test program, reach out to local officials and warn them, do anything? And to my knowledge, the answer is no. There was no interaction with local officials. And as we'll see here in a slide in a few minutes, when the Supreme Court Justice goes in front of the Senate Oversight Committee, he says, mistakes were made, we're cleaning this up, we won't do this in the future, we're going to have a number of controls in the future to prevent this kind of thing from happening, including appropriate interface with people representing local authorities. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to tip off the sheriff precisely, at midnight on September 11 that it's going to happen. But there, I'm not aware, and I'm pretty sure there was not any notification, any interaction with anyone representing the interests of the local officials. Now, the other thing you asked is whether Polk County approved of or said there was no problem with this. I don't have any information about that. So I have heard Polk County has even said we might investigate this from a criminal matter, just as Dallas County has, but I haven't heard anything official out of Polk County. So that's more of a rumor, I guess, is the way that I would take it, rather than anything from Polk County. I'm not aware that Polk County has said anything officially about this. It's an interesting question. Yes.
Just a quick follow-up. So the point about the sheriff not yet reading the investigative report, to me, it doesn't seem relevant since they were not in a position to make the decision. That's the county attorney decision. That would be the question, more relevant question. Did the county attorney read it around that same time?
Okay, so his question is, do I know if the county attorney read that report, the 30-page report? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he did read it, because it's very relevant to a case. And what we have seen from the county attorney is, first he files felony burglary charges, then he drops it down to a much lower criminal trespass. Why did he do that? Probably because he's getting a lot of very valuable information and evidence somewhere, such as that report or the documents related to that report or the process of going into that report. So as that report was a very well-known document, is a very well-known document. It was presented to the Senate Oversight Committee. So the county attorney would have to be, closing his ears and shutting his eyes, not to be aware of that and recognizing that he's actually advancing a criminal case. This would be very relevant evidence to him. So broadly speaking, I'm sure he is aware of a lot of what is in that. My guess is he's probably read the whole thing and even may know more than that. In fact, I do think he knows more than that, as I'm going to be saying here. So the fact that the sheriff will say publicly, you know what, if those guys actually had permission to be here, I'd go tell or would have gone and told the district county attorney to drop the charges. So even that statement by the judge might be evidence that would be supporting the defense of the defendants, that says, even the judge felt like if he'd have established the right kind of evidence at the right time, he wouldn't have pressed these charges from the beginning. This whole thing would have just blown over. There is a very enticing piece of information in this ARS Technica article. The county attorney was interviewed. He says, I have to be very careful what I say. And I agree with him. He has to be very careful what he says publicly. He says, there is some information that has not been revealed. And I thought, that is very interesting. I call it the mystery evidence. I don't know what it is. But when he says that, I'm also inferring he has read that 30-page report. And he knows everything that's in that 30-page report. And he's got something else. I don't know what he has. And so all I can do is start speculating about what he might have. Now, I was having a conversation with John Strand yesterday evening about this, and he says, well, why doesn't the county attorney just bring all of his evidence out? Why doesn't he bring out this full story instead of holding it back? And the reason is that the county attorney has a responsibility to ensure a fair judicial process and a fair trial. The county attorney's job is not to convict these guys on Twitter or through media reports. And therefore, as evidence is assembled, evidence then is produced through the appropriate procedures through the judicial system, and the county attorney has made the decision that I'm just not in a position, and it's unethical for me to be releasing this information publicly at this time. Now, whether the lawyer representing the defendants has this information, I don't know. I have no idea what the information is. It's very possible that the employees know what the information is, whatever it is, and they've explained it to their lawyer. And so I'm just speculating. Was there some other witness that we haven't heard about? Was there something captured on a security camera that we don't know about? But my suspicion is that whatever this mystery evidence is specific to those two employees. My suspicion is that it's not just some abstract argument about the governance of that courthouse and the extent to which the county is supposed to govern it and the extent to which the state administrators can be doing things relative to security. I think that's kind of an abstract argument, whereas I'm guessing that there's something specific about these employees. I don't know what that might be, but I can speculate. And I want to make it really clear, just because I speculate, I'm just an educator here. I don't work for any of the parties here. I don't represent them, and I'm not advocating any of them. But imagine that they go to Polk County, for example, and imagine that they encounter somebody who works for the county, and they produce their get out of jail free card. And whoever this is says, you know, I'm not going to call these state court administrators. I'm just going to tell you, get out of here. Yeah, no, we don't want you around here. We don't think you should be here. Just get out of here. Well, that would be an interesting piece of evidence. In addition, there was a lot of time apparently between when they broke into the 2 buildings in Des Moines and midnight the next night when they got into the building here. What were they doing in that time? I have no idea what they were doing, but I can imagine, and I'm just speculating. So they try to social engineer their way into the building, and they tailgate behind somebody, or they impersonate something or whatever, and they get in, and somebody representing the county talks to them, confronts them, and they maybe produce this document, and whoever the representative of the county is says, you know, I'm not going to dig into this. I'm just going to tell you, get out of here. You don't belong here. You're trespassing. Get out. Okay, that's a very interesting piece of evidence that could be relevant to the prosecution. I just don't know. And thus, we, the community, the public, will not know for a while. And I don't know how long it would take. I don't know if we'd have to go all the way to a trial to find out what this mystery piece of evidence is. So, as I have been looking at this case, reading lots of comments, I've seen some negative comments out there relative to the county officials, and I feel that these negative comments are inappropriate, and I feel that in effect the community needs to calm down. And I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing people, but I have seen some negative comments out there where I thought, you know, this is inappropriate, and it's jumping to conclusions when not all the facts are out there. And so I argue that, and I declare that I think that the county officials need to be treated with respect, just because, for one, they're fellow human beings, but two, they've got a job to do, and they have limited resources, and things take time to find out exactly what happened. Not everybody, nobody, at least nobody in public knows exactly what happened. The sheriff had to make a snap decision in the middle of the night. He was presented with a very odd situation, and he had to make a snap decision, and he made a decision. One of the things that I found kind of sympathetic from the sheriff's point of view, I mean, me having some sympathy for him, is his deputies show up at that courthouse at midnight, and they don't know what's going on. They have no idea what's going on. And they start looking around, and they see a couple of guys behaving in a very unusual way. According to the sheriff, in his interview in ARS Technica, these guys were perched down like turkeys looking over the balcony. So they're sitting like this, looking over the balcony. Now, that's not your typical, you know, late night drunk who just stumbled into the courthouse, for example. He's not your typical burglar down the street, Joe Blow, who breaks into everything around here. These guys, they're acting like a team. Hey, that's something for the county sheriff to start thinking, who are these guys? They act like a team, and they were wearing relatively large backpacks. Okay, well, this sounds like an operation. It doesn't sound like just typical burglar trying to break in and steal a computer or something. They're wearing backpacks, and according to the sheriff, as the deputies and he start looking at these guys, what crosses their mind is, well, it's September 11, and those backpacks are big enough to hold a pressure cooker, and maybe they've got a bomb. Maybe that's what's going on. Who knows? But it's really odd. And so the sheriff is in effect caught off guard in a really unusual situation that just does not feel like a typical burglary, and therefore he reacts based on that particular situation. Now, broadly speaking, that teaches us some lessons in cybersecurity. Try to think about, what does my behavior look like in the eyes of somebody else who doesn't live in my world and who wasn't expecting me to be doing whatever it is that I am doing. Another point about kind of the community trying to calm down and treat these officials with respect. The county attorney's job is not to educate the cybersecurity community about how to do your work. His job is to ensure that there is a fair judicial process and that there's a fair trial if the trial is going to be held. And so his job is not say, well, I need to come here to this conference that Black Hills is putting together, and I need to explain my side of the story. No, that's not his job, and he needs to keep his mouth shut on this kind of thing. Needs to be very circumspect on what kind of information he gives out. So here's an example of the kind of problem the county attorney has. If he were to come to this conference, for example, and start explaining his evidence, then it becomes well known here in this county and well known perhaps all over Iowa what the case was, and then people are going to be talking and speculating on Facebook and on television and so on. And in fact, you poison the jury pool so that it's harder to have a jury trial where you get 12 people off the street who don't know anything about this to come and sit and evaluate this case in a neutral way. So he has to be very quiet about what he talks about. He can say a few things, but he's got to be careful that he does not jeopardize the judicial process or jeopardize a fair trial. So I know here in the community, there's a lot of desire to get to the end. Tell me everything. We want to know. And I see people write comments. I need to know right now whether I'm going to be thrown in jail when I do my pen test work. And I need to know the outcome of this case right now. Otherwise, it prevents me from being able to do my work. And I understand that sense of eagerness to get to the end and find out all the information, find out whether a crime was committed or whether a crime was not committed. Unfortunately, the legal process is slow. And there's reasons for the legal process to be slow. The legal process needs to ensure that the appropriate evidence is managed in the proper way. And there's due process of law, which includes the right of the defendants to confront anyone who is making allegations against them, the right of the defendants to cross-examine a witness who might be giving evidence against them, and other rights that the defendants are entitled to. And so I sense all this interest in finding out what happened, but unfortunately, we're in the legal process that could take time. And the trial, as I understand it, is set for April of next year. In the hearing at the Senate State Legislature, the Chief Justice primarily is basing his knowledge on that 30-page report. He admits we, the state courts, have made mistakes and we need to correct ourselves and clean this up. The documents were confusing. If you go through those documents, I'll say a few things about those things in a few minutes. They used inconsistent terms. There was inconsistencies in terms of when certain things were supposed to happen. There's confusion about whether you can use lock picking, for example, as a method for gaining entry into a building. And the Chief Justice admitted that our court administration did not think all this through carefully. So I think there's some important lessons to learn from the case about how you develop documents, you develop a process, you have a plan, and then you start executing it in a way that might injure somebody else or cause problems for somebody else. And cybersecurity can be a very complex field. And trying to get all of your documentation in order is a lot of work. It's not easy to have clear documentation explaining who's going to do what. And the people who were leading this from the state court administration were technical people. They weren't, there was not a legal review. There was not a political review. It was work by IT people and the CISO at state courts. And technical people are often not as highly attuned to legal concerns. They're not as highly attuned to political concerns as other people might be. Higher administrators, for example, within the state courts would be more aware of political types of concerns. A lawyer, of course, would be more aware of political and legal concerns. So here's an example of the state court administration missing an opportunity to prevent this thing from getting out of hand. When the coal fire employees break into the state building at night, they leave their business card on the administrator's desk. He comes in the morning and he sees, they got here. Well, I see they're doing their work. This is interesting. I'm learning something. And he sends them a congratulatory note. But then the lawyers writing the report later come back and interview him, and they said, did you make a connection in your head that if they're going to break into your building at night, that they're going to go to the county and break into the county at night? And he says, no, I didn't make that connection. And if I had made that connection, I'd have started thinking really hard about this. So in other words, it wasn't clear among the administrators who were running this thing that these guys were going to take physical measures after hours with respect to the county courthouses. And so the Chief Justice said, going forward, we will have new controls to prevent these kinds of mistakes from happening. We're going to have legal review. We're going to have some review by a physical security expert, and we're going to involve local representatives. Okay, all that sounds good. Another thing I note, though, it looks like cost and red tape, meaning so now when the administrator of some government agency who's seeing this experience is starting to develop a program and a contract for pen testing, then he or she has to start thinking about, gosh, who are all the people I need to touch base with? And, legal takes time, and lawyers are busy, and going through these documents and updating and making sure that they're all consistent takes an awful lot of time, involving other experts, finding the appropriate way to reach out to local officials. That takes time, slows things down, just makes the whole process much more cumbersome, and it can, in effect, slow down, in effect, the good work of cybersecurity that needs to be done, because we spend so much time just working on red tape. I think I've pretty much already said this from the county's perspective. They felt like they were taken advantage of, and they felt that law enforcement was caught off guard and in the middle of the night in a dangerous kind of situations. I've noted some people say, what was the danger? And from the point of view of police officers showing up to an unusual place, seeing an unusual situation in the middle of the night, that's danger. It's inherently dangerous. You just don't know what is going on. You don't know what mistakes you might make. So in effect, the county was saying that the state had taken local law enforcement for granted and wasn't properly anticipating their needs and their reactions. So kind of generic lessons to draw from the story is, throughout cybersecurity, we're making decisions all day long, and we make difficult decisions, and we're dealing with all kinds of questions that are hard to answer. And thus, we in cybersecurity have to exercise judgment. And good judgment, obviously, is what you want to exercise. Doing that all the time is hard to do. It requires experience. It requires the ability to look ahead and think about, what's this going to look like in the newspaper? What's this going to look like in a court? What's this going to look like to the FBI or something like that? So this learning how to exercise good judgment is a broad talent needed within cybersecurity, and it applies to everybody involved, including the client, in this case, the court administration, the contractor, which is coal fire, the particular employees on the ground, as well the prosecutor needs to exercise good judgment. I'm not aware of anything so far that I see reflecting the county prosecutor not exercising good judgment, but I don't know what his secret evidence is either. I don't know what that mystery evidence is. Good judgment includes appropriate ongoing communication. And so an example of lack of communication is that Coal fire got into the Polk County Courthouse. Apparently, they did not tell their client that they had gotten into the courthouse. And so the administrator said, we didn't find out until several days later after this whole thing broke that they'd actually been into Polk County. Okay, well, arguably, there should have been greater communication between the client and the contractor to know what steps are being taken and at what point am I going into these sensitive types of area. And broadly, I have some questions about, and I'm not trying to lay blame. I am trying to analytically, in a clinical way, look at the situation and ask abstractly, what are some examples of possible bad judgment or ways to exercise better judgment? So a question I have, was it common practice at coal fire to be doing pen testing at midnight? Why midnight? What's going on here? What is the thinking behind that? And a question I ask is, were these guys under time pressures, for example? Is that a reason why they were doing it at midnight? I got to hurry up. I got to do this. I got to finish this thing. I got to be out of here tomorrow because I got to go do something someplace else. And the question I have is, and this, I'm not seeing any information on this, is to what extent was coal fire management fully informed about all the steps they were taking? Did coal fire management, for example, know that they were going to be there at midnight? Arguably, coal fire management might be a little more alert to, midnight, county courthouse, I don't know. I don't know that makes the most sense. Another generic lesson is documents need to be written carefully. Oh, it is so easy for a lawyer to say that. It's so much harder in the real world to go through documents and read them carefully, think about them really carefully. So I'm holding here the get out of jail free card. The title of it is Social Engineering Authorization. And it describes social engineering as impersonating people, providing false pretenses, tailgating. Well, wait a minute. What about lock picking? Well, it didn't say anything about lock picking, but it did say you will not subvert alarms. You will not force open doors. Okay. I'm not supposed to force open a door, but what about lock picking? Well, I don't know. As the sheriff starts reading this, if he says social engineering, it means you're supposed to be talking to somebody or tricking a person, not doing something to subvert a door or pick a door or subvert an alarm. Another aspect of this document is that one of the telephone numbers on here of the contact was not correct. Well, yeah, I can imagine these kinds of things happen. You just end up with the wrong telephone number. I make these kinds of mistakes myself, but it was a pretty serious mistake in the particular situation. There's a public disagreement between coal fire and the sheriff as to whether alarms were subverted. One of the stories I hear is that the coal fire employees get in, they go and turn on the alarm so that it'll trip. And they weren't subverting the alarm, they were actually turning it on so that it would ring and that police would be called. The sheriff, on the other hand, says, and I don't know what evidence, and I don't know, not sure if all this evidence is going to come out until a trial, but the sheriff says they actually were subverting the alarms. I've already mentioned the concern about forcing open doors. Does that include lock picking? Apparently they used lock picking techniques and tools to pick the locks. Another example of poor wording in the documents is that there had been this general discussion and some telephone calls, and then they modified the documents to some degree to recognize that some activity might happen after hours. You go back and you actually read the documents, and one, it speaks of activity may take place between 8 a.m. or maybe it's 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Now, wait a minute. This is Central Time. Why does the document say Mountain Time? I got to guess. coal fire is in Colorado. So they live on mountain time, but their document ends up speaking of mountain time, but that's not very helpful when you're trying to figure out what is authorized for activities here in Iowa. And the document speaks of day and evening activity. Okay, how far does that go? That leaves a lot of ambiguity. What is the evening? Is midnight the evening? Well, I think that raises questions. If I was drafting those documents looking backwards, I'd like to provide a lot more clarity, precision as to what hours activities are supposed to take place. According to the law firm, as the law firm picks through the documents, the law firm says there was a lot of jumbling of terminology and mixing up of penetration testing technology and red teaming technology and other kinds of technology. Broadly, the law firm said penetration testing is like online activities trying to get into a computer, whereas red teaming is more of a physical method to get into buildings. But the law firm said these terms were all mixed up. And I'm not going to pass a judgment one way or another. I heard even John say here at the beginning of this presentation that there's confusion within the community as to precisely what is penetration testing and what is not penetration testing. Another point of confusion is there was a master agreement from 2015, and they just used that master agreement to carry forward into 2019. But there wasn't necessarily a lot of real careful review of the old agreement to see whether it covers the scope of what's being done this year, and therefore the old master agreement did not speak in terms of lock picking. So there was ambiguity about whether lock picking was supposed to be within the scope of activity. It's hard work to pull together these complex documents and make them make sense. And it's easy for a lawyer like me to pick through somebody else's documents afterward. Yeah, you give me a stack of documents, a contract, a master agreement, terms of engagement, so get out of jail free card. Inevitably, if somebody else wrote it, I'll pick it apart and say, well, you know, you didn't cover this, or you failed to define that, or there's confusion over this other kind of thing. All of us work in a world where we have documents that provide guidance on what we're supposed to do, whether they be internal policies, they be contracts, and keeping documents up to date, making sure they're all consistent is a tremendous amount of work. And it costs time, money. If you've got to engage lawyers, that's expensive. But we can see here that this was a situation where a poor drafting of documents contributed to the overall confusion of the situation. So to kind of wrap up my formal presentation, kind of generic lessons are cybersecurity is politics, and you got to understand the political aspect of what you're doing. You got to understand who you're going to be interfacing with and prepared to deal with them through the appropriate kind of communication. And effective communication can be very hard work. It can include trying to really stop and think really carefully, how do I explain this to somebody else who doesn't see the world the way that I see it? So how do I explain it through contracts or through reaching out to someone like local officials and getting them on board with the activities that I'm doing? So I argue that good communication involves professional skepticism, which means looking at a document like this that says social engineering authorization and say, wait a minute, this is not just about social engineering. As a good skeptic, I would say this needs to be broadened to cover lockpicking, for example, and red teaming types of efforts. And good communication involves a lot of intellectual rigor and a lot of focus on reading words and thinking about words. So my final point is that I remember Dwight Eisenhower was the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in World War II. And someone asked him, what is it that has qualified you and prepared you to be the Supreme Commander of Allied forces? There were lots of guys who went to West Point and lots of generals who've had a lot of experience leading armies. And Eisenhower said, My peers at West Point were all engineers, but I majored in English. And therefore, as the Supreme Commander, I don't have to think so much about engineering problems. I think about communicating with people, making sure everybody is on board and everybody understands what they're supposed to do. And so background in communications and thinking about communications helps us to do what we're supposed to do, even though we may be working with a lot of complex technology.
All right, fantastic. I think we have time for a question, if anybody would like to ask before we transition to sharing. Yes.
I have a question. That it's obvious that you're here to defend the coal fire.
It's obviously what?
It's obviously that you're here to defend coal fire.
I would disagree with that, but go ahead.
When the coal fire broke into the Dallas County Courthouse, the Dallas County Sheriff did his job as a Dallas County Attorney. There was no question. Those guys broke into the courthouse. They should have been arrested. But for you to come out here and verbally attack the sheriff that's doing his job and the county attorney is not acceptable.
Okay, so to repeat the comment, and I'm very respectful of your comment, and I welcome your comment. Comment, as I understand it, is that the lady feels that I'm representing the coal fire point of view, and that it's disrespectful for me to criticize county officials. And the comment was the county officials have done the correct thing, and that unauthorized people broke into the local courthouse. And I respect everything that you say. And to the extent that I have come across as disrespectful to this county or any official in this county, I want to correct myself, and I apologize. I apologize to the county of Dallas to the extent that and if it's perceived that way, you know, I'm sorry. It's not my intent.
Well, there's no question about it. They broke in.
I'll accept your comment. They broke in and they were wrong. That's your comment. I appreciate that comment and welcome the comment.
I would just like to comment on the other side. I think that if anything, you kind of opened my eyes to some of the ambiguity surrounding this and some of the, maybe, to me, you made the sheriff and Dallas County look less bad. It looked like there is ambiguity there. There's, it's more of a, room for improvement on both sides. I don't think in any way you were like trying to roast the county or the sheriff or anybody else. I think you're just trying to present all sides of the argument.
All right. So the comment is that this gentleman felt that he's learned something from the presentation, and that he's learned the story is a little more complex than he may have thought it was before he walked in, and he felt that I was being more neutral, but I appreciate that comment as well. Yes?
From my point of view, I didn't know really a lot about this whole situation. I kind of heard it on the news, but didn't really pay much attention to it. I was putting myself in the position of the two guys that if it was their job and they're just doing what their boss told them to do and they weren't doing anything else pinky in the process, I feel bad for those guys because they're just doing what they're doing. And I mean, I can see where there was huge ambiguity and a lot of miscommunication going on through the whole thing. I feel bad for those guys. If they go to jail for doing what they were told to do and nothing more than that. I mean, if they were out there, doing their job, but, doing a little hinky on the side, that's a different story. But if they're just, that's all they were doing, I mean, I could see, the company maybe getting a hefty fine because they weren't very, clear and, didn't write their contract correctly or whatever, but I can't see those guys going to jail if that's all they were doing.
All right, so I'll just summarize that comment and pass it over to John. So the comment is that the lady said she has a lot of sympathy for the individual coal fire employees if they were just doing what they were told to do. It's a summary of what she had. So I thank you all for your participation.
All right, thank you.